Welcome to Literature Femter. Friends, our today's topic is the age of Chaucer. In today's video, we will discuss about the political and social background of Chaucer's age and also the greatest contributions of Chaucer in the English literature. The period between 1343 and 1450 is known as the age of Chaucer. The age of Chaucer is the first significant period in the literary history of England. It marks the beginning of a new era, new language, and new literature. So let's talk about the political background of the age of Chaucer. The following events took place in the age of Chaucer. Number 1. Hundred Years' War. The period between 1337 to 1453 is marked by a long succession of skirmishes and armed conflict between France and England. Under the warlike guidance of Edward III, England won a number of glorious victories. France crumbled and Edward III was once recognized even the King of France. French lost its official prestige and English became the speech of common people, but also it was used in courts and parliaments. These wars generated feelings of patriotism and nationalism. But later, English might waned and French were able to secure tangible gains. After the death of Edward III and succession of Richard II. This major point is that it is known as the Age of Transition. Age of Transition implies the shift from medieval to modern times. Though modern elements were coming into prominence, yet the age was still chivalrous, religious-minded, superstitious, and backward in most respects. The shift from medieval to modern times, the love, war, religion contributed in fullest developments of the age. And Canterbury Tales, the Knight of the Chaucer, was typical of his kind. The standard behavior of the chivalry was over there against feudal system. At this time, there was a man whose works contained elements of medievalism and modernism, and that was Chaucer. The major thing is that, in the age of Chaucer, the corruption in the church started to decline, and this gave rise to the birth of Parliament. Let's discuss the social background of the age of Chaucer, the Protestantism. Protestants was one of the three groups of Christianity. This movement was for the reform of church in England. Peasants' revolt. In the age of Chaucer, the suffering peasants were very restless. Peasants' revolt was a widespread rebellion in 1381 against poll taxes imposed in 1377, 1379 and 1380. The leaders who led this revolt were White Taylor, Jack Shrew, John Ball. The mob disturbed the England but was controlled by Richard II. Next is Black Death. During the age of Chaucer, many people were victims of poverty. England was often visited by epidemics, especially plague, as people were not much careful about cleanliness and sanitation. This dreadful epidemic came in 1348 in England. About 30% to 60% of the population of England was affected and people were died. It is called Black Death because black naughty balls appear on the bodies of victims. Talk about the literary career of Chaucer. It was in fact Chaucer who was the real founder of English poetry, and he is rightly called the father of English poetry. Unlike the poetry of his predecessors and contemporaries, which is read by few except professed scholars, Chaucer's poetry has been read and enjoyed continuously from his own day to this, and the greatest of his successors, from Spenser and Milton to Tennyson and William Morris, have joined in it. Chaucer in fact made a fresh beginning in English literature. He disregarded altogether the old English tradition. His education as a poet was twofold. Part of it came from French and Italian literatures, but part of it came from life. He was not a mere bookman, nor was he in the least a visionary. Like Shakespeare and Milton, he was, on the contrary, a man of the world and of affairs. The most famous and characteristic work of Chaucer is the Canterbury Tales, which is a collection of stories related to the pilgrims on their way to the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury. These pilgrims represent different sections of contemporary English society. The Canterbury Tales is a landmark in the history of English poetry because here Chaucer enriched the English language and meter to such an extent that it could be conveniently used for any purpose. Moreover, by introducing a variety of highly finished characters into a single action and engaging them in an animated dialogue, Chaucer fulfilled every requirement of the dramatist. Chaucer's work fall into three periods. During the first period, he imitated French models, particularly the famous and very long poem Le Roman de la Rose, of which he made a translation. This poem, which gives an intimate introduction to the medieval French romances and allegories of the courtly love, is the embryo out of which all Chaucer's poetry grows. During this period, he also wrote the Book of the Duchess, an elegy, which in its form and nature is like the Romaunt of the Rose. Complaint unto Pity, a shorter poem, and ABC, a series of stanzas, religious in tone, each opens with the letter of the alphabet. In terms of the second period, which extends from 1373 to 1384, show the influence of Italian literature, especially of Dante's Divine Comedy and Boccaccio's poems. In this period, he wrote the Parliament of Fouls, which contains very dramatic and satiric dialogues between the assembled birds. Troilus and Cressida, which narrates the story of the Trojan prince Troilus and his love of a damsel, Cressida, the story of Griselda, in which is given a pitiful picture of womanhood, and the House of Fame, which is a masterpiece of comic fantasy, which a graver undertone of contemplation of human folly. Chaucer's third period, which extends from 1384 to 1390, may be called the English period, because in it he threw off foreign influences and showed native originality. In the legend of Good Woman, he employed for the first time the heroic couplet. It was during this period that he wrote the Canterbury Tales, his greatest poetic achievement, which places us in the heart of London. Here we find his gentle, kindly humor, which is Chaucer's greatest quality and its very best. Chaucer's importance in the development of English literature is very great because he removed poetry from the region of metaphysics and theology. Last but not the least, we will discuss the Chaucer's successors. After Chaucer, there was a decline in English poetry for about 100 years. The years from 1400 to the Renaissance were a period bereft of literature. There were only a few minor poets, the imitators and successors of Chaucer, who are called the English and Scottish Chaucerians, who wrote during this period. The main cause of the decline of literature during this period was that no writer of genius was born during these long years. Chaucer's successors were Oxford, Lydgate, Haves, Skelton, Henryson, Dumbar, and Douglas. They all did little but copy him, and they represent an era of mediocrity in English literature that continues up to the time of the Renaissance. Thanks for watching.